Hey guys, how you doing today? All right, so to kick off a little biblical study, I thought we would do something super revolutionary. Start at the beginning. I know. But then we can go jump all throughout the text. But the reason I'm doing this is because I made a video, I don't know, whatever, but throughout something rather cutting edge, we'll say. I know I'm not the first person to throw it out, but I want to talk about it more, which has to do with evolution and creation science, so to speak, actually being completely compatible. And that by dividing the two up and saying, to believe in evolution, you have to be atheistic. And to believe in any kind of deity, you have to accept a young earth of 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And there's completely different science for both. Before I speak into that, let me just give my background. I was homeschooled by evangelical Bible Christians from 3rd grade through technically 11th grade because I skipped a grade. I was very academically advanced. I'm very passionate about learning, so I just love to learn. So I was taking the SATs in 7th grade and all that jazz. But they were very focused on biblical education. So as I've said before, we studied the Bible every morning with the Dr. Dobson companion text. But also I got a very strict education on creation science. So I was taught all the holes in evolution, what was wrong with all the different skeletons and all the different transitional forms, and all the proof around why there was a young earth and how it backed up the Bible being when the Bible's interpreted as a literal text. So I understand both the support thought process and then also the holes in actually both theories, because then I went back to high school for the last 2 years of school and did take evolutionary science and learn more about it later. As I also completed my spiritual progression, I got into Eastern philosophies. And one of the coolest things about Eastern philosophies is that they're more focused on everything being grown here. Taoism, Buddhism, there's much more of a sense of, rather than sort of being born or made or put into this environment, all of it being grown. And that's when I first kind of started to get introduced to this concept that maybe the whole universe and earth was grown. And since I've always been taught as part of spirituality that God operates outside of time, why do we need a young earth to believe in creation science? Why couldn't it be millions upon billions of years old? God isn't on a timeline. He's not in a hurry. So he's not a Western capitalist American. Shocker. So I kind of wanted to see, is it possible that the story in Genesis is a high-level allegory for evolution that sort of could be translated to ancient peoples? Like, you're talking about people that would have to understand a creation story. And if you're talking evolution, which is kind of a big cosmic function to people who don't know anything about biology, could that be boiled down into the story in Genesis and make sense? I just wanted to see if they were compatible. So I'm going to share that with you, okay? So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1. This first Bible I have, I'm actually going to use 2. But I'll just show you real quick. I'll cover my mother-in-law's name, but it's actually her Bible from 1961. And it is a King James. So the languaging's a little different, so I'm going to balance it with my 90s NIV, which is very different than the King James. And we're discovering a lot of differentiations between the translations. So my husband and I are going to have to get better and better at being like more quick about how we analyze it. Anyway, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, I want to be clear here that there were no planets at this time. We're talking about the inception of everything. So that line is essentially talking about the inception of nothing into something, in the sense of the non-physical into physical. This is the creation of the physical realm, is what it's describing, right? So the earth was without form and void. Now, earth is actually not referencing the planet. This is the confusion that happens in a translation where we use the same name as for our planet as the same word for earth or firmament or that which you plant something into, right? What our planet is made out of, which, as you go back through various linguistic translations, leads to matter, the very definition of substance. So what it's really saying is earth was without form and void. It's saying matter was created, but it was without form and void. So in essence, it was a completely open creative environment, but you had all the makings for matter. So earth existed suddenly. like that came into form, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, one cool thing about this is we forget that often in space, there's not actually space, it's actually dark matter, which is a form of sort of celestial water. It holds the planets in place and it moves things about. So really what we're seeing here is this creation of this sort of dark matter and then also this creative matter that's alternate, that can become form. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, meaning the creative force that we're referencing is this massive thing you can't possibly understand, this cosmic creative force of God, for lack of better phrasing, moves on all of this, like on the space of all this expanse. Okay, next. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. That was a sad clap. There we go. That sounds like a big boom to me. That sounds like the Big Bang. Let there be light. It even has that explosive, like, let there be light. I think that's the Big Bang. Why not? Okay, so then it goes on, that basically God did some stuff with that. But then it says, like, and a day passed, right? And everyone seems to think that creation actually happened in 7 days. So let's reset here, that there were no days at this time. We're just making matter. It's form and void. So there's no sun. There's no planets. It's not doing anything yet. So day, when you go back through linguistic translations, actually means a period of time or an age. So when it says that the world was created in 7 days, it means 7 ages of time. What those were could be anything. And since God is known to operate outside of time, especially per biblical lore and literature, it wouldn't matter how long it was, right? Okay, so we're moving on. We got the Big Bang. Next. Okay, then it says, God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Okay, so this one gets a little King Jamesy, so we're going to flip over to something here. Okay, and this just says, let there be an expanse in between the waters to separate it, so the expanse separated. And then it said, let the water under the sky be gathered in one place. So what we're seeing here really is attrition. These could be ages of time. It's talking about moving mass and moving water and starting to form like earth and various substances and various elements. What we're getting here is like H2Os coming into existence, right? And each one of these happens in an age, in a day. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees. So what we get there is like vegetation started to grow before it ever mentions any kind of animal life form. That's what I really want to get into here. It talks about let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees. Now, wouldn't that make sense if I were a creative force growing a universe that was going to sustain advanced life forms, that I would start with plants? And isn't that what we found through evolutionary science? Okay. All right, then we say, okay, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the skies, and make seasons and days and years is the next part in the next age, which would be things like coming into solar systems and their own unique trajectory as attrition again continues to happen, which would be the face of God on the waters, moving everything into its logical, loving place. Then it literally says, let the water teem with living creatures. Let the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living, moving thing, which the water teems according to their kinds, and every winged bird. Well, isn't this what we know from evolution? Didn't it start in the water? And then weren't birds like some of the most ancient forms? Wasn't that part of the whole trajectory? And that was another age. Go on to the next age. God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, wild animals. And it was so. So God made the wild animals, and that was another age. Wouldn't that be them coming out of the ocean and evolving into more complex biological creatures? What's wrong with it? Wouldn't this be a great allegory to tell ancient peoples about evolution? And then God, whatever the creative force, said, let us make man in our image. That's with our imaging device. We are creative, but we'll get to that later. In our likeness, and let them rule over the animals. So man is described as coming last. So as a quick summary here for the Genesis story, there is the idea of matter coming into form, that's sort of being formed with attrition, plants coming first, then things in water, air, ground, then man. Now, as a broad overview of evolutionary speculation as to how things come alive, aren't those in alignment? And if we're talking about a living biology, wouldn't it make sense not to be a dead, predictable, same thing where things come and die off and, go extinct and then we run out of them, but instead to be a living biology that's constantly adapting and growing? Because it always was. Because if you combine evolution and creation, you start to get a living biology that makes a lot more sense for a living God that says, I'm always adapting, I'm always overcoming. This is how we can have faith in the betterment of everything, is that the biology is actually intelligent, that you are a complex form of consciousness, absolutely. But you also are built on tons of forms of tiny points of much simpler consciousness, but consciousness nonetheless. We see it in cells. We see it in everything happening in your bloodstream. Like, we know that there are so many points of consciousness, and rather than thinking that it's instinct and it's all operating off some dead biological mechanism that was put into it from we don't know where, wouldn't it make more sense to say, just like we operate in an intelligent way and seem to have inspiration and some kind of connection to love and beauty and these things, that maybe everything else does too. And then we have a living biology that slowly grows over time and is going to better places. And this is the origin story for that, which tells us that time and age doesn't matter. God isn't defined by such small things, but that this is how the world came to be and that it's continuing to grow and we're all growing out of it and with it. And doesn't that give us all a little bit more ownership with it? And then rather than squibbling about the age of the earth or evolution or creation, we could all just go like, wow, everything's growing here. How do we want it to grow? And how do we want to grow with it? Maybe we should get to that trash pile in the ocean. And even if you think that's a bunch of hogwash and you were given dominion over the earth, you should still care about the trash pile in the ocean in order to be congruent. But alas, I digress. That is my first deep dive into biblical translation on the Genesis creation story. And not getting into the differences in translations, which do exist, but as you can see in the essence of time, they'll be done separately. Be well, my friends. Kiss. I love you.